Kibo was 16 years old, born and raised in the Katutra neighborhood, one of the poorest areas of Windhoek, the capital of Namibia. Katutra, a place where one learns early that nothing is given to you, where life sometimes consists only of not giving up. Kibo knew all of this. His mother worked at a laundry, and his father had never been around. He had grown up with brothers who had long been involved in theft. If Kibo wanted to survive, he had to be tougher than the others. School, for him, was often just a place to kill time, at least until that day when a priest from his community asked if he wanted to join a church-organized school trip to Rome. For Kibo, all of this seemed incomprehensible. He had never seen the sea, let alone traveled to another country. And suddenly, he was supposed to travel to the Holy City with a group of Christian students, many of whom came from wealthier neighborhoods and had a very different way of seeing the world. Kibo agreed, not because he was interested in the history of Christianity, but because he saw it as an opportunity, a chance to get away, and maybe to bring something back, something valuable. Because one thing was clear: Rome meant wealth, churches full of gold, tourists with fat wallets, statues, paintings, things that could buy entire houses in his neighborhood. Even during the flight, Kibo watched his classmates as they delighted in Italian food, quoted Bible verses, and made plans for what they wanted to see in the Vatican. Kibo said little. He smiled politely, but inwardly, something was stirring in him. On the third day of their trip, it happened. The class was allowed to tour the Vatican. Kibo walked with the others through the massive halls, past intricate mosaics and giant paintings. He listened as the teacher talked about the history of the papacy, saints, martyrs, and miracles. But Kibo only half listened. Then he saw it. In a small, somewhat secluded room, it stood on a marble pedestal, a silver angel statue, no bigger than a drinking glass. Finely crafted, the wings detailed with intricate designs, holding a small golden cross. It was beautiful, and Kibo immediately felt that it was valuable. Very valuable. He stopped. The rest of the group kept walking. Only he remained, rooted to the spot. What if I take it? I could sell it. In Windhoek, they'd give me a whole car for it. Maybe even more. The thought came like a flash. Brief, intense, but it burned itself into his mind. Kibo looked around. The camera on the ceiling was aimed at the entrance. The corner where the statue stood was dark. No guard in sight. He hesitated. Then he stepped closer. One more glance. His hands trembled slightly as he opened his backpack. He pushed it forward, letting it almost unnoticed slip onto the floor. With a quick movement, he lifted the statue. It was heavier than he thought. Cold metal in warm skin. In seconds, it was hidden in the lining of the backpack, wrapped in a jacket. He heard no alarm, no noise, only his pounding heartbeat. But before he could leave the room, he felt it. A shadow. Footsteps. Two men in uniform. The Swiss guard. Tall, serious, vigilant. Stop. What do you have in your backpack? Kibo wanted to flee, but he knew it was over. They led him silently through high halls, past tourists, past his classmates, who stared at him with wide eyes. Some whispered. Others stared at him as though he were someone else. Then a door was opened, and there stood the Pope. A man in white. Gentle eyes, no anger, no weapon. Only silence. And a gaze that spoke more than 1,000 words. Kibo didn't know which frightened him more, the fact that he had been caught stealing, or that he now stood here, alone in a bright, quiet room, with nothing but his backpack on his lap, and the Pope, no more than 3 meters away. The room was surprisingly simple. No golden walls, no marble floors, just a plain table, 2 chairs, a large wooden cross on the wall. And silence. That eerie, almost suffocating silence that Kibo couldn't place. The Pope was already sitting. He seemed smaller than Kibo had imagined. Older, too, but his eyes were awake, alive. And despite everything that had happened, there was no anger in his gaze. Kibo lowered his head. The pressure in his chest was almost unbearable. He had never felt so caught, so exposed. Not even when the police in Windhoek had briefly detained him after he had stolen a cell phone at the mall. This was different. Bigger. a member of the guard handed the Pope the backpack. The statue was taken out. It still gleamed, untouched. The Pope held it in his hands, turning it slowly, looking at it with a mixture of melancholy and understanding. Then he spoke. "What is your name, my son?" Kibo hesitated, then murmured, "Kibo." The Pope nodded. No further questions, no accusations. No long sermons. Just this one word. Why? Kibo paused. His thoughts raced. He could have lied. Said he just wanted to look at it. That it was an accident. But instead, a sentence came from his mouth that he could hardly believe himself. "I wanted to sell it and buy a car." Silence. The Pope slowly placed the statue back on the table. Then he looked directly at him, not as a thief, not as an enemy, but as a human being trying to understand another. "What would you have done with the car?" Kibo shrugged. "Drive. Be someone. Not have to walk anymore." It was honest, raw, and somehow sad. Then something happened that no one in the room expected. The Pope leaned slightly forward, slowly pushed the statue toward Kibo, and said, "Then take it." The guard members froze. One even raised his hand slightly, as if to object. Even Kibo didn't believe what he was hearing. "What? You are not what you have done. You are what you make of it. If you believe that this statue will help you live a better life, then take it. But I hope that one day you will understand what really matters." Kibo was speechless. He felt his ears grow hot. His hands trembled. He could feel all eyes on him. When he left the room with the statue in his backpack, his classmates were gathered in the hallway. Their eyes said it all: shock, anger, disappointment. No one spoke to him. No one congratulated him. And Kibo? He lowered his gaze, clutched the statue tightly, and ran. He didn't know where to. Just away. Away from the Vatican. Away from the shame. Away from this man who had tried to understand him, and whose generosity weighed heavier than any punishment. Back in Windhoek, Kibo was suddenly someone. The flight to Europe had earned him respect, but the statue, it was his trump card. His treasure. Something no one from his neighborhood had ever owned. He spoke to no one about what had happened in the Vatican. Not to his mother. Not to his brothers. Not to the teachers. He hid the statue carefully in an old cardboard box under his bed. But the thought of money wouldn't leave him. A few days later, he sought out a man he knew dealt in such things: antiques, jewelry, stolen phones. The man asked no questions if the price was right. When the dealer saw the statue, his expression changed. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Kibo shrugged. "Family heirloom." The man laughed. "You do know this didn't come from some souvenir shop, right?" Kibo said nothing. He just wanted the money. The man made him an offer, an amount that would buy a used car. No more, no less. That same day, Kibo stood in a dusty parking lot in Katutra, in front of an old but shiny Toyota Corolla. The windows were tinted, the rims chrome. For Kibo, it was the symbol of his new life. He paid in cash, and drove home for the first time in his life as a driver, not a passenger. The first days felt like a dream. Children waved at him, his brothers patted him on the back. The neighbors who had ignored him before suddenly spoke to him. But then the cracks began to show. First, the transmission had problems. Then the air conditioning broke. Eventually, the car stalled in the middle of the road, the engine dead. The mechanic explained that the car had been poorly put together, no warranty, no returns. Kibo stood there, in the midday heat, surrounded by the noise of the city, and felt something inside him break. He thought back, to the room in the Vatican, to the Pope, to the look that said, "You are more than this." And now, what was he now? A boy with a broken car who had sold a sacred statue for a few weeks of attention. For the first time, Kibo didn't feel pride, but shame. Not just because of the car, but because of everything. The statue, he now realized, hadn't just been an object. It had been a symbol of trust. And he had sold it for a fleeting dream that now crumbled like dust in the sun. Since the car had finally broken down, Kibo hadn't touched it. It now sat still in the yard, burned by the sun, a rusty testament to how quickly dreams can shatter. Kibo avoided walking past the passenger side. That was where he had hidden the envelopes with the cash back when everything was still new. Now, every memory of it felt like a punch in the stomach. On the outside, he continued to pretend everything was fine. He went to school, laughed with friends, took selfies with a car in the background. But at night, when everyone was asleep, he sat awake in his room, thinking about Rome. And about him, the Pope. How he had given him the statue. Without force. Without anger. Only with trust. And Kibo had trampled on that trust. It started with small things. He could no longer pray peacefully. At school, he skipped communion classes, although he had never missed them before. His teacher, an older nun from South Africa, eventually spoke to him. Kibo, your light has grown dim. He said nothing. He had no words for it. But inside, something grew. A sense that his behavior would have consequences. Not just because the car was broken, but because he had changed. One day, he caught his little brother lying. Kibo was supposed to scold him, but the boy just looked at him and said, "You lie too, don't you?" Kibo froze. In that moment, he realized he had become what he never wanted to be, a role model for the wrong things. That same night, he got up, quietly went outside, and sat on the edge of the yard. The night was cool, and for the first time in a long while, he had tears in his eyes. He wanted to get the statue back, but that was easier said than done. It had long since been resold. The dealer had no number anymore, was unreachable, they told him. Kibo started working at the market. He carried boxes, helped set up and tear down stalls. Every cent he earned, he put in a small box. He didn't talk to anyone about it, not even his mother. But deep in his heart, something had awakened. Not the desire to be rich, not the desire to be seen, but the desire to be able to look at himself in the mirror again. Months had passed. The box under Kibo's bed had become heavier, not with guilt, but with coins and crumpled bills. Every single cent had been hard-earned. He sold water bottles to drivers, helped elderly women carry their bags, worked at the market after school. While other boys his age played soccer or hung out in internet cafes, Kibo stood in the sun, sweating, silent, and counting. The statue was no longer within reach, but he had set a new goal for himself. He wanted to go back to Rome. Not as a tourist, not as a schoolchild, but as the boy who had once stolen and now wanted to make it right. The journey was expensive. The thought of standing in the Vatican again made his heart race. But was it even possible? Would they let him in? On a quiet night, he prayed for the first time again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He asked for strength. Not for forgiveness, not for wealth, just for strength. His mother, who had rarely asked about him all this time, eventually noticed that Kibo had changed. One evening, she sat down beside him. "Kibo, you're not the boy you were when you came back." He nodded, said nothing, but his eyes filled with tears. She took his hand, and in that moment, he knew he would make it. A former priest from their area, who had connections in Italy, agreed to help him with the formalities. It took time, and it cost almost all the money he had saved. But finally, almost a year after the theft, Kibo was sitting on a plane again. When he arrived, it was cold, different from that spring day, and yet everything felt familiar. The narrow streets, the old stones, and the Vatican. With trembling fingers, he entered St. Peter's Square, this time without a group, without a teacher, just with himself and a letter in his hand. He didn't know if he would meet anyone, or if they would turn him away, but he had the courage to try. The man at the reception was surprised, but polite. Kibo handed him the letter. In it he explained everything, brutally honest, and asked for just one thing, a conversation, with the man who had given him the statue that day, the Pope. Kibo sat on a long bench in the Vatican's reception hall. Everything was still. The silence here was different from Namibia's. It was deep, reverent. He had handed in his letter, and that was all he could do. And yet, he hoped. After almost an hour, a man in black clothing approached him. He was kind, speaking softly, in good English. "Kibo, please come with me." Kibo stood up, his heart pounding wildly. Every movement felt suddenly heavy, like in a dream. He was led through hallways, through doors that seemed to belong to another world. And then, one last door opened, and there, standing quietly, was the Pope. He smiled, not reproachfully, not surprised, just warmly. "I've read your letter," he said. "Sit with me." Kibo did so, slowly, with his head bowed. "I've disappointed you," he whispered. The Pope nodded slightly. "Maybe, but you've come back." Kibo trembled. I I earned the money myself. I wanted to buy the statue back, but it was gone." The Pope looked at him for a long time. "What you lost isn't important. What you've found matters far more." "I've lost my pride." "No, Kibo. You've learned it anew." There was a long pause. Then the Pope stood up, walked to a small table, and took an object in his hand. When he returned, he was holding another statue. Smaller, simpler, but beautifully carved. He handed it to Kibo. "This one belongs to you. Not as punishment, not as a reminder, but as a symbol that you have changed." Kibo stared at the object. His fingers trembled as he took it. "But I don't deserve it." "That's exactly why you're getting it." Tears ran down Kibo's face. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen again. Not as someone who had fallen, but as someone who had risen once more. "I want to help people," he said quietly. "Back in Namibia. Kids who are like me." The Pope smiled. "Then start today." When Kibo left the Vatican grounds, he was no longer the same boy who had stolen the statue. He was someone who had fallen, who had made a mistake, and had the courage to make it right. And that was worth more than any money in the world. What would you have done if you had been in K-Boy's shoes? Share your thoughts below, subscribe to my channel, and I see you in the next video.